shining a light on the issue of domestic violence.
The United Nations study out this week finds domestic violence is one of the most common killers of women around the world.
Fears are growing at domestic violence shelters. Domestic violence experts in our top story.
Well, a domestic violence situation quickly turned into an assault.
The federal government calls it a pervasive problem that frequently goes undetected.
We're talking about the courage that it takes to come forward as a victim.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 3 of Community Voices. My name is Ryan Stillwater, Development Director here at Saving Grace. And today is super exciting, this episode, because we are joined by a man from Deschutes County Probation. And he is just a cool guy. And I really enjoyed our conversation. I think you will too. But first, I wanted to thank one of our new sponsors, New Fathom IT. What if you didn't have to worry about IT support for your small business or even at home? What if you had someone you could count on just to take care of it so you could focus on what matters most, your business or your family? Our friends at New Fathom and their IT support team is standing by, ready to support you, and they're right here in Bend, Oregon, serving Central Oregon. Just go to newfathom.com or call them at 541-728-3315. Do that today, learn more, and please thank them for being someone's saving grace. All right, so let's jump right in. Here's Justin Bendele. Justin, thanks for jumping on Zoom this morning.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So why don't you go kind of right into who you are, your background, whatever you feel like sharing, so we can get to know you a little better.
Oh boy. Well, I guess I could start off with I grew up in Central Oregon, lived in Redmond as a kid. So I kind of from the area, and then we relocated to the Valley and spent, my senior year through the next 20 years living in Eugene area. So I started my career working in Eugene, working for Lane County. I got hired as a deputy sheriff working in the corrections division. So I spent about 6 years working with clients while they were incarcerated in the correction system. I spent several of those years at the county jail and then moved over to what was a work release center, where I got to see a little bit different side of the correction system through that. While I was working there, I liked the job, but just didn't feel that it was really what I was looking for in a long-term career. I really wanted to be able to impact people at a little bit deeper level. As a corrections officer, you get to see a cycle of people that get out, come back. They just keep reoccurring, through an open door. Yeah. And you don't really get to see what happens after people leave. So, I was really interested in trying to figure out if there was something I could be involved in that would maybe try and help people not come back to jail. So I started learning a little bit more about parole and probation and kind of found out some of the ins and outs and the details of what parole and probation officers do. And I tried to get hired in that field and was lucky enough to get hired by Lane County. And I guess that was, like I said, about 6 years after working in corrections, and made that step. And I worked in Lane County as a parole and probation officer for about 7 years before my family decided to move back to Central Oregon, where I grew up and where I consider home. We wanted to be able to raise our family over here and have it be just kind of that familiar home feeling for me. And it's a beautiful place to live. And obviously coming from the Valley, where you get maybe 150 days of sunshine a year, to get 300 was a good step. So when we decided to do that, I was lucky enough to find a position open at Deschutes County for a parole and probation officer. And I came over here about 6 years ago and worked as a parole and probation officer here for about 3 years before promoting to supervisor for our department. So I'm one of three we have 3 supervisors, and then a deputy director and a director for our department.
Great. So how old are your kids now?
Almost all adult and grown now. My oldest is 21, my middle is 18, and my youngest is 16.
Wow. Once we stop recording, I need fatherly parenting advice with my oldest approaching her teen years very rapidly.
Oh boy, get ready.
Well, excellent. I mean, that's quite the background. And I mean, having known a number of police officers and probation officers and correctional officers, corrections, not correctional, huh? It's not necessarily the most common to hear what you just said about wanting to make a bigger impact, a deeper impact, I think is what you said, and being, alarmed or not, not enjoying seeing that revolving door that you mentioned.
Yeah.
Can you kind of maybe, shine some light on you, just who are you personally that you think really, why did that affect you so much, seeing that revolving door?
Yeah. Well, I think it was interesting for me, as a kid growing up, I never thought I wanted to go into corrections of any kind. I always wanted to be a teacher and had a desire to be a teacher. And of course, I wanted to coach and play sports. If I could have been a professional athlete, that would have been great. But that, when I stopped growing at 5'6", I kind of lost that dream, and, just the way life circumstances worked out, I got offered a job, when I was pretty young, working in a loss prevention field. And it was just kind of a job to kind of get, the bills paid. And it kind of really fell in love with the excitement of the law enforcement aspect of it. And, watching somebody steal something from a grocery store, and then, the adrenaline of kind of getting involved in that was pretty interesting. So I started looking a little bit more into the law enforcement field, and it was not something that I was sure I wanted to get involved in, but I never expected to work at a jail. So when I thought, maybe being a police officer would be kind of fun because you can be out and you can protect the community and do those things. And when I applied for the sheriff's office, I didn't realize at the time until I got hired that everybody starts in the jail. No matter how many years you've been in any type of system, you're starting at the jail when you work for Lane County. And it was quickly thereafter that I realized that I didn't want to be a police officer. I was seeing how frustrated that a lot of the officers were that worked there. They were working double shifts, marriages were struggling. It was kind of all consuming, and I just realized that probably wasn't the profession for me, because I wanted to stay married and was pretty interested in being a little bit more than just somebody that's out writing tickets and those types of things. And at the same time, I was also realizing that the mindset working in corrections was that everybody that you were working with was bad, and that was kind of a struggle for me. I didn't see people as bad prior to working there, and I always kind of viewed people who were in the system as making mistakes, and to where, for me, that always seemed like common sense. It almost seemed like a rare, I think, kind of like you were mentioning, is it sometimes that's kind of a rare opinion. I think people are easily jaded when you work in that field for a long time because it's all you see.
Sure.
And, as I spent time there, I didn't want to have my view change into that. I truly believe, and I still believe to this date, that, everybody is capable of change. Some are more willing and some aren't, but I believe that there are people that are good that make bad decisions. And good and bad is such a, silly term to use, but genuinely, just because somebody makes a mistake and gets on supervision for something doesn't mean that they're not capable of moving on with their life and having a productive life and having a great family and being a good person. So that's where I kind of started wanting to kind of expand my ability to see if I couldn't help make a difference and make it so people didn't come back.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And that is interesting to me, how the initial adrenaline rush of, like you said, catching someone shoplifting,
Yeah.
and then moving on to a discontent that you didn't want to just keep catching people shoplifting, right?
Yeah.
Use that as a metaphor. So moving on to a more, serious note and side of your career. It says here that this is what you sent me before this. You supervised all types of caseloads, including clients on supervision for domestic violence. As a supervisor, one of my roles is to supervise our domestic violence unit. What is the domestic violence unit? With your perspective of people aren't bad, they make bad decisions, has that been consistent as you're working with an offending, partner in a relationship who's now under your supervision? Why don't you describe that for us?
Yeah. Well, so to explain kind of our domestic violence unit, we have offices in Lapine, Bend, and Redmond. So in each of those offices, we have POs that work specifically with domestic violence offenders. So in Redmond, we have one full caseload, one PO that does, her caseload is fully just domestic violence offenders. And then we have another PO in Redmond that has a half caseload of domestic violence offenders and then a half caseload of just like general street crimes, thefts and other types of things that aren't specific to sex offenders or mental health clients, those types of things. So we have about 1.5 POs in the Redmond office. In Bend, we have 2 full-time POs that have their caseloads are full-time domestic violence offenders. We have a third Bend caseload that is all pretrial domestic violence offenders. So that PO supervises people that are not yet convicted, but they're participating in a pretrial program. And then in Lapine, we have in Lapine, we have kind of a similar to Redmond. The caseload out there is about half time. So the PO out there has half of a caseload of domestic violence and then half of a caseload of regular generic street crime type cases.
Got it.
So that's that's kind of what our domestic violence unit is. Of course, that group of POs receive specialized training in supervising domestic violence cases. The Department of Public Safety in Salem actually does a domestic violence specific training week for people that supervise those cases. So they get a little bit of extra training in addition to what would be like the generic Parole and Probation Academy. So we try and support them with specialized training for those cases. What was the second half of the question?
I don't remember.
Okay.
This is the keep rolling though. This is good. It's a good overview.
So yeah, I that's kind of what our unit. We have specific meetings together to talk about specific issues that are happening. Any changes to like case law, staff cases that are, like maybe high risk or specific issues that are going on that we need to talk about. That unit will also invite outside treatment providers into our meetings to talk about like specific things that could be happening in the world of domestic violence treatment or batterers intervention treatment. So we try and work pretty closely with the treatment provider to make sure that we're, working together as a team while working with those clients.
Got it. And what does the specialized training look like? How does that differ from just the normal academy?
So, like I said, it's about a week-long class, and it's not a class; it's several classes. But what they do is they invite different instructors and different kinds of there may be a 4-hour class where it's a victims impact panel, where they'll bring victims of crimes to come in and share their stories, and to share how their relationship with prior parole and probation officers may have been impactful, and just little pieces that officers can take on how maybe to better work with victims of crime. They do specific things for like the batterers intervention program will give a presentation on like how batterers intervention treatment works and how POs can work with that. They do specific like role playing scenarios on how to work specifically with clients that may have committed domestic violence and those types of things, because there can be differences. There's a little bit sometimes of power play that comes into the situation sometimes. So learning how to deal with those situations can be helpful, and just playing them out. And there's just a number of different classes. They do. I know they had a like search and seizure class, so that you can learn tools and like tricks on how to search cell phones to look for maybe hidden, victim contacts and things like that. So just a variety of different things. It changes every year just based on kind of what, may need to be updated and whatnot. Legal standards and things like that.
Gotcha. I'm jotting down some more questions here. My mind is racing. So what does a day in the life look like for your POs? Specifically with domestic violence in the domestic violence unit.
To be honest, it's every day can be different. The one thing about this job is that a lot of times we try really hard to be proactive, but end up being reactive. you can show up at work with a plan to do 6 scheduled things, and then within the first hour, you may get a phone call that changes the rest of the day. So it really varies, but for the most part, the day in the life of a PO would be, depending on what's scheduled that day. But our POs do a number of things like office visits where the clients will come to the office, they will have a meeting. The PO may go over, like a cognitive skill building worksheet with them to talk about certain areas that they're struggling with. They may just be talking about, concerns from the community. If they've gotten information, they may be investigating information that was provided. They may be talking to them about their treatment program, what they're working on in there, and trying to build on that skill and to work with that. The POs also go out in the field and they do home checks. So they'll go to the residence and try and contact the client there and do a walkthrough and look for anything that might be concerning or a violation or something that's out of place for the conditions of that person's supervision. But like I said, for example, we may come into work one day and get a call from local police saying, "Hey, we've got your guy detained and he's got, somebody hidden in the back room and he won't, cooperate with us." And we may go out to that house and help, the police try and figure out if it's his victim in the house or whatnot, or if he's got something there that he's not supposed to. So.
And if the individual breaks a restraining order, the terms of a restraining order, does that the victim would call police call you? There's an internal system of notification.
So that kind of gets into there's kind of a 2-prong thing there. So a violation of a restraining order is a crime, right? If a client violates a restraining order, the victim calls the police are going to respond and they're going to make an arrest. The officer may call us and just say, "Hey, we've got this guy in custody. Obviously, if he committed a new crime, he's probably in violation of his supervision. Would you like to address that?" At that point, we may say yes. We'll send a detainer to the jail, which means that we're also going to address his supervision violation.
Got it.
A lot of times there's not restraining orders in place, but there's court orders, or a supervision order. So let's say somebody who is released from prison may have a condition of their post-prison supervision that says, "You may not contact this person." Well, that's not a restraining order. It's a no contact order from the parole board. So the difference being is if the victim calls and says, he calls dispatch and the officers respond, and it's a no contact order, it's not a new crime, but it is a violation of their supervision. So an officer may respond to a situation where somebody's violating no contact, but that officer needs the parole and probation officer to detain that person on the violation of the court order or the post-prison order. It's very confusing and complicated, but the no contact is different than right. An actual court imposed or
got it
order. So
okay, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. One thing that I heard you say when you're talking about the DV unit is the full-time person in Redmond is a woman. You said she.
Yes.
I know the statistics, but I'm curious about locally. Are the majority of your clients men, women, mix?
Yeah, I wouldn't put a percentage on it, but I would say we're probably well above 90% of our clients on for domestic violence are men. It's typically a crime that is more associated with male population than the female population.
And that makes me so curious to talk to this individual in Redmond, your PO there. Just from what I know of offenders and, at least what's behind typically their attitude towards women. And I'm real curious to see what her office visits and home visits are like with her clients.
Yeah. Well, honestly, the majority out of the 5 POs that we currently have supervising domestic violence cases, 3 out of the 5 are female. And that's kind of typical for us. And this is, not to get stereotypical, but I think it works really well for us because, in a lot of times that the clients that are, very pushy or dominating, they can push buttons pretty well. And, as somebody who supervised domestic violence cases, sometimes I found myself getting agitated and frustrated. And I feel like the Redmond officer that we have, she's just a calm, cool. It's really hard to push buttons for her. She's going to maintain her coolness all the time, which is a skill. And I think, she's, I find that our officers that work, actually all of them, even the males are the same way. They're just very good at keeping their cool and understanding that this is a process. And, it's not something that you should take personally. It can be very hard sometimes when somebody's yelling at you and calling you names, not to make that personal.
Mm-hmm.
Right? But, this is a job, and you have to just maybe make sure that you can compartmentalize that and not have that, affect how you're supervising someone.
Yeah, that makes sense. And it's interesting. I'm sure this came up in some part of your specialized training, but the power and control wheel,
Oh, yeah.
and for a male client to be sitting across from their PO who's a woman, they don't get to. I'm speculating here. I'm guessing they don't get to kind of exert any of their normal power and control tendencies because their PO is the one with the power and control over ensuring they're doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
And
I mean, I think just like in any population of people, you have people that are better able to control their emotions, and we see a wide variety. I mean, we certainly see people that come in and they act like they are, the model citizen, and they are courteous and they will always be that way. And, sometimes when they leave, we don't get that same response when they're not here. Right. But they're able to put on a good face here. We have several people that show up here that aren't able to put on a good face. And those conversations certainly are more difficult and don't always go, that same way. But, I think it's just varies. There's just sometimes people have bad days too. Sometimes people that you work with on numerous occasions come in and they're great every time. And then, they've had a life event or something that's going on. And then, they kind of slip into, that power and control and try and take over. And like you kind of alluded to, we certainly discourage that. We don't want our officers to be abused in any way or intimidated. So we'll pretty much end those conversations pretty quickly and just try and reschedule for the next day or whatnot.
Gotcha.
Bring them back on track.
And kind of on that note, you mentioned during the office visits, there's, did you say worksheets to go through things that your client's struggling with? What are the things they typically struggle with, if there is a typical?
Well, it's different for every person, but, like what we try and do is really facilitate prosocial thinking. So if somebody is, for example, like we have things called behavior chains, where if somebody, got into an argument and, punched a door, we may take that specific behavior and talk about, okay, so this was the behavior. Now let's work through this process. And the PO will take them through a step-by-step process of like, where did this end up? Or where did you get, or like a pros con sheet. So like what is the pro of these benefits? And we'll write down all the good things that happen and how does that benefit you in the future? And then, we'll go through that and kind of just, sorry, my lights are motion activated and I'm not moving enough. So they're confused. So it's just, it really kind of depends on what the specific issue was. We have people that struggle with their time management. They can't get to appointments on time. So we'll work with them on keeping, an accurate accountability of their time. So there's little tools that we can go over with that kind of just address specific things that somebody's struggling with.
Is there, I have so many questions. I'm trying to honor your time and stay on point, but so I guess two-part. How many clients, give or take, are parents? And for how many who are parents, is that a real motivator to do well, with their PO and kind of going through the program?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I don't know if we've ever taken like a study on like how many are actually parents. I would believe there's a high percentage. I couldn't put a number on it, but I would guess it's probably more than not. And it really depends on the situation, whether or not the parental structure motivates them or doesn't motivate them. I think, what we've learned is that sometimes in severe domestic violence cases, the children are sometimes, used by that offending parent as leverage, or they, so it can be kind of can be kind of one of those things where it may appear that the kids are a motivating factor, but it may be being used as a motivating factor to kind of like, try and get, back at the mom, because if he takes the kids part of the time, he knows that, the mom has to worry about what's going on with that, and she'll be more likely to, want to reunite with him. And so we kind of look at it differently. I think that, we certainly like to use children as a motivating factor, because as if you're a parent, you know that that the parental feeling of having your kids around is a good thing. We obviously know that in the world of children, growing up with parents is a good thing. We know that when kids are not in their parental home, it can kind of be impactful, and but we have to balance whether or not it's the appropriate thing to do to be reuniting parents with their kids when there's been a separation due to court circumstances or whatnot. So we always are trying to evaluate that, what's best is the overall. So there's kind of a team approach that goes into that, us working with the treatment provider to really kind of look at how they're doing in their classes, if they're really participating. A lot of times our clients are required to take parenting classes, so we'll check with the parenting class and make sure that they're participating and doing those types of things. So I do think, I guess the short answer to that question, or the long answer at this point, is kind of, it depends. Everybody's different. You definitely, we have some clients that come in, and I truly believe that their one offense will be their only offense, and they engage completely, and they are, ashamed and appalled about their behavior, and the fact that they had to be removed from their family and their kids was so devastating that they will learn their lesson and hopefully never go back to that behavior. There's others that I don't know that they take the treatment class seriously, and it's more deeper ingrained.
Yeah, that makes sense. That totally makes sense. And probably the kid aspect's a good segue into Mary's Place, which clearly you're familiar with. So Mary's Place, for those who don't know, is our safe exchange and supervised visitation center. It's based in Bend. It's at the courthouse, more or less. And it's an opportunity, as we say, for the offending parent to spend meaningful time with their child or children. Can you provide your perspective of Mary's Place and how your clients have utilized that, the right way, the wrong way?
Yeah. I don't have a whole lot of examples of the wrong way. I think Mary's Place is a great resource. Oftentimes in our world, we're working with an offending parent who has, put the family dynamic in a dangerous atmosphere. But obviously, this parent may want to have contact with their kids, and they don't want to lose that ability. Sometimes the transfer of kids from one party to another can be difficult, especially if there's a restraining order or a no contact order, those types of things, or if there's intimidation or fear of those types of things. So Mary's Place provides an atmosphere where our clients can go to a structured place where they have the ability to have a visit that's monitored by staff, and the staff are, ensuring that the child's safety is, the main priority. And during this process, the victim of the crime or the parent that's, concerned about things can know that the child's being, supervised safely, and they're safe at the same time. And I think Mary's Place does a great job of, making sure that that's a safe environment for everyone, and it provides them with a place where otherwise, we wouldn't have that ability. There's, without the third party that's trustworthy, it can be difficult to exchange parenting and things like that. So I think it's a great resource.
Yeah, good. And I did not pay or prep Justin to say that, everyone.
Yep. Big fan of Mary's Place.
Good. Thank you. And I, when I first started with Saving Grace almost 2 years ago, I say this a lot, but I didn't really quite understand the need for it, the benefit it is to our community, until I Google searched, like child custody exchange violence or something.
Oh, yeah.
And the number of news stories that came up from across the country of parents trying to do that in like a perceived safe place, like a retail store parking lot. Yeah. There was one in California last year that was in a police station parking lot, and a shooting erupted, And so I think if you really want to understand, because now Mary's Place is the only one like it in the Pacific Northwest, as far as I know. So that's a big deal for Central Oregon.
It is. It is a dangerous situation, I would just add, for if anybody that's watching this that doesn't know, the sheriff's office, in the parking lot of the sheriff's office in the jail, the sheriff's office installed there's 2 parking spaces that are under video surveillance for those types of exchanges. So it's just another option for somebody that maybe isn't in a position to use Mary's Place or whatnot, but there is an option to do an exchange of custody there. It's also an exchange, I mean, for anything. If you were buying something off the internet and you were worried about it, you could park in those spaces, and it's just monitored and recorded, so that it's just a safer place to meet.
Nice. That's good to know. I think I did know that. I didn't think of it in the context of an exchange.
Yeah.
But I definitely knew about it for the internet sale safety.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I only buy like, $10 items off the internet, so I'm not too worried.
Right.
Okay. So a couple last questions. Is I have found I like reading the answer that our guests give to the question, why are you passionate about what you do? Can I go ahead and read as you wrote it?
Oh,
your answer?
Sure.
I feel like we have an important role in protecting the public while holding clients accountable and trying to help them improve as people at the same time. It is one of the few jobs where you get to be on different side of things. I think that's really great, because you've clearly communicated your heart for people. You don't have a very strict black and white perspective on someone was convicted of a crime, of a domestic violence related crime, and they have this scarlet letter on them now forevermore. But I think for people to hear that from you makes them feel good, because you holding clients accountable. I mean, that's part of the equation, in a very structured way that you've communicated. So
Right.
I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all fits together. I think, for one, that's very similar to, I think that's kind of our mission statement, is to, protect the public is number one. But by protecting the public, there's a lot of things that go into that. I mean, how effective are we at protecting the public if we're not changing future behavior? It's great that we arrest somebody every time they do something, but wouldn't it be far much better if we could just prevent it from happening again, right? So if we can not only protect the public, hold people accountable, but also try and impact their future behavior, maybe we're all going to end up, being in a better society and be able to kind of, improve as a place where we take care of people instead of, shunning them. And
Absolutely. That's good stuff. So lastly, that was such a beautiful thing to end on, but I don't want to end just yet. I would love to hear about whether it was early in your career or more recent, a DV related situation that really sticks out in your mind. And I ask because I think sometimes the at large community has a very, very narrow view of what domestic violence is and what it looks like between a couple. And I think sometimes some of the more nitty gritty specifics or scenarios helps them really broaden what they imagine that world to be like, and that provides a lot of value.
Yeah. Well, the one thing that just pops in my head, and this is kind of, man, we should have ended on the positive, but, I think of a situation where a client that I supervised, a few years ago when I was supervising cases, this client was already on supervision for domestic violence against his spouse. And, this, I think when I supervised him, he had already victimized the spouse twice. And, it's this, I'd say probably the hardest part of our job is looking at a situation and trying to find what's best for the family, especially when like the victim or the survivor of this crime wants to be with the offender, and, looking at that situation and knowing it's unsafe. But if you have the client that jumps through these hoops and goes to the treatment class and does everything they're supposed to, there's an expectation that we will reunite that family. And if we look at the situation and there's no reason to keep them apart, we've kind of got to get stuck in this position where we've got to support that. Even if my gut feeling says this has happened twice already, why would we encourage this? And I think that's difficult for me. And, that was a difficult situation. And, the reason that sticks out for me was because, once again, after reuniting, the police call at 3 a.m. is letting me know that this client just, threw the wife down, and she hit her head and was bleeding profusely. And, we're starting the cycle all over again. And, that's certainly one of the situations that, and then of course there's the prison cycle, and then he gets out and we're doing this all over again. And, it's just, that's the frustration of the job is, not feeling like there are times where, what you do makes a difference. If we've done this cycle 3 times, what's going to prevent it from happening a 4th?
Yeah.
Probably not, and that's the downside to, no matter how hard you try, sometimes you can't change behavior all the time. You can't, somebody's got to be willing to want to change and, really kind of be full force in making a change if they want to. Absolutely.
And that, that sentiment really transcends it's not just in DV, but, I came from an organization in California similar to Bethlehem Inn, Shepherd's House, kind of mixed. Yeah. And it was the same thing, to see individuals relapse repeatedly or get approved for housing and blow it, that kind of self-sabotage or what seemed to be an inability to change, it is one of the most frustrating things. Yeah. And to learn that you can't want something more than they want for themselves is a hard lesson.
I think when you think about the relapse on substance abuse, it's we know that that's a disease and it's a sickness, and that it is one of the hardest things in the world to get control over. And then, it's hard to look at that the same way when you're looking at violence. I don't know that I look at violence as a sickness. I think that you have control not to be violent. And, it's one of those things that relapse shouldn't be acceptable in. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, to end on a positive note is, and it's really something I learned from our last episode from Barb, our counseling center manager. She was talking about how, there's the little bows of success. So it might not be the full thing for the survivor, but it's the little successes that we celebrate with them. Right. And so I think in the case you're describing, what could be part of their safety planning for the survivor is relocating. So if there is this individual that refuses to change, part of the safety plan that we help them do, if that's something that they're wanting, right, is to relocate, which is more serious, of course.
Yeah,
but sometimes, it's what's needed for the greater good.
Definitely.
Yeah,
definitely.
And to end on another high note, what's the most important thing you want our listeners to take away? You said, I would just hope that people would know that our goal is to do what's best for the overall good of the family and people affected by domestic violence. I think that's a good high note. Yeah. Is there anything else you want to end with?
No, I think that sums it up. I think that, we have a profession that we kind of, we're not in the mainstream media, so people don't know a lot about parole and probation. And I think, it's probably, one of those things that people don't know what our goal is or what we want to do. So yeah, I think that's good.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really could keep going. I've really enjoyed hearing from you, learning from you, and I know our listeners and viewers will as well. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Learn more about us at saving-grace.org. Thanks for joining us.